The way that I see it is that we are here to learn and experience, and if we can learn from other people's experiences, then it makes some of the sufferings that we go through worth it a little bit more. And so that's why I've been so open about my experiences. And
Yeah.
because when I was going through all of those things, I was like, if I can make it to the other side and show other people how I get out of this, like it will be more worth it.
Yeah. So I would like to welcome our very first guest for Godcast Podcast, Stephani Niblock. So Stephani is an author, a speaker, and trauma-informed financial educator. She's here to share her remarkable journey from financial struggle to authenticity as the author of Be Your Money Hero. She'll guide you through the transformative power of understanding your money story. So, despite a solid financial start, Stephani entered adulthood with emotional, spiritual, and psychological wounds. These wounds manifested in a lack of boundaries and self-worth, which slowly bled her money dry. In 2016, the universe handed her the gift of hitting rock bottom. Oh my gosh. Bankruptcy, bills piling up, and a surprise divorce, and two young girls to take care of with just a job in hand. Here's the twist. Stephani chose to turn her struggles into lessons. Through her recovery, she discovered the small changes create significant impacts, that guilt and shame have no place in her financial journey or ours, and past traumas can silently sabotage your finances. Now, Stephani uses her painful experiences to help others uncover the hero within themselves. Don't miss this chance to learn, grow, and be inspired to rewrite your money story and be your money hero. So that's an awesome bio. So thank you for giving us that whole setup.
Well, thank
So,
you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
yay. So, where I want to start the conversation is let's just get a little bit more into the details of your story and like what was your religious upbringing, if you're okay with sharing that. I know it's a very vulnerable thing for me to share, so I'm hoping we can all give more permission for us to be our own unique, uh, diverse people, our own diverse
Yes.
stories. Yeah.
The way that I see it is that we are here to learn and experience, and if we can learn from other people's experiences, then it makes some of the sufferings that we go through worth it a little bit more. And so that's why I've been so open about my experiences. And
Yeah.
because when I was going through all of those things, I was like, if I can make it to the other side and show other people how I get out of this, like it will be more worth it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but to go back to your question, my religious upbringing, I think that you have to have a little bit of background about my parents. So my mom was the daughter of a Foursquare pastor. So she grew up Christian as a preacher's daughter. The oldest, she was first chair flute, she was cheerleader, she was held up to a very high standard, whether that was something put on her or whether that was something she expected of herself. I don't know the answer to that one. And then my dad grew up in a church. It was brought about by a man called William Branham, and people hold him up to be a prophet. And so those two belief systems kind of came together when my parents were married and I came into the picture. And my mom and dad did not always see eye to eye when it came to the spirituality, but they so I'll give a little bit more background. When I grew up, it was a very conservative church. So we ended up having three, kind of a triad of organizations throughout my childhood. And it was Vision Forum, which was a spin-off of the Institute of Basic Life Principles. And the Institute of Basic Life Principles has come into the spotlight more this last year through the Duggar family, because that's the organization that they were affiliated with. So there's a couple of books out that the Duggar girls had written. Happy Shiny People is a new documentary that came out on last June about the cult. And then what made my family a little bit different in that was that they also believed in a prophet. But essentially, I was not allowed to wear pants. I was not allowed to cut my hair. You're not allowed to use, well, you're not supposed to use contraceptive. Like, we were homeschooled. And so I could send you a picture of what I looked like by high school. Like, my hair went down to my ankles. I'd never had worn pants. Like, I never even had my hair trimmed, never went to school a day in my life.
Wow.
And so that's kind of the upbringing that, from a spirituality perspective, it was kind of fundamentalist kind of Christianity.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I can relate to that. I take the opportunity to tell a little bit of my story also in these interviews. So, but I've become aware with my dad's passing this last year, just how much he was brought up Nazarene, and their definition of being saved was so intense that even if you thought something wrong, it was sin. So I can really relate to that kind of what seems extreme to mainstream, religions. I relate to that. So I just wanted to share that with you.
Yeah. And that was the belief system that I grew up to, except for with the prophet aspect of it. He taught that there is a bride. So you have two destinations. So you come on this life, you go to hell or you go to heaven.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way that you go to heaven is if you have accepted Jesus as your savior, but also you have to maintain like that bride worthiness. And so the prophet also taught that within that Christian group, there is a bride, and it is the bride of Christ that is taken in the rapture. And so not all of the Christians would even be taken in the rapture, but only the bride, who was like the elite. And so there was like a very high level of perfection that was not just expected, but demanded for salvation almost.
Wow.
And so that when we're talking about perfectionism and some of the conversations that we've had outside of this podcast, where I'm the oldest of 12. And so and my dad owned several businesses. So I was like the oldest of the family. We went to church, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, Friday night.
Yeah.
Like, we went to church a lot.
Yeah.
And so to have all of that pressure on you throughout your childhood, and to have expectations of perfection required, it still can follow me. And so those are some of the things that I'm still working through, even as a 35-year-old.
Wow. So, so that gives a good picture of what you were brought up into, which is a pretty intense container. And so I'm because I know you, I already know that you're not still in that container. And I'm wondering, for you, what happened and what did it take for you to break out? And what was that process like for you?
So it has been a very long and difficult journey, Sora. I started asking questions when I was about 17, I would say. And it was, for me, because perfection was always a requirement. And as humans, we are imperfect people, no matter how hard we try. Because my own personal beliefs now is that we're on this planet to have experiences and to learn and grow and evolve our souls. And so perfection is just not possible in this state, in this planet that we are on. Perfection is just not possible. And so when to portray perfection to other people, I had ended up developing quite a mask. And so I was not authentic and I was not true. It was always, the happy, shiny people
Mm-hmm.
type of expectation. Like that is what you have to reflect out. Because when you grow up in this fundamental Christian household, we were taught that we were, and and part of how it ties back into the IBLP and like the Duggar related family aspect of it is that the children are arrows to be used by the father to shoot out into the world and to have a quiver full of these arrows. And that's why they have so many children, is so that they have a quiver full of these arrows to shoot out into the world to spread the light of the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
And then our purpose on this planet in that Christian belief is to spread the light, spread the love of Christ,
Mm-hmm.
and to be a testimony of what it means to have a happy and saved life. And so when there are things going on behind those closed doors, which similar to the Duggar family was also going on in my household to an extent, like there was abuse in our household. Our family was not the happy household that we had portrayed that it was. All of those things needed to be covered up, and I developed kind of a disconnection response where I could just kind of compartmentalize certain things and kind of keep that in, the house where it was, and kind of keep those things in that bubble. And then when I am out, whether it was at church or whether I was at the office with my dad, the things were good, and
Mm-hmm.
things were only allowed to be good.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of that is, of course, I'm part of the LGBTQ community. And my best friend, how that had all come about, was my best friend when I was 16, 17. We had journals that we would exchange because we couldn't really talk a lot. When you're in a cult, things are very isolated. That's the way that cults kind of keep control. And so we'd have these journals and we'd write to each other. And then when we see each other, we just swap the journals because there was never enough time to actually connect and talk and to like just be
Get
friends.
real. Yeah.
So we'd have these journals that we'd swap. And through writing back and forth to each other for years, Danny was able to kind of get a peek behind that mask that I had held. And they were the only one that actually knew me for who I was, not this like oldest boss's daughter, she's got it all together kind of facade that I had brought. And so when we were, I can't remember how old we are. I think I was like 18, 19, probably 18, 19. They had come out to me as being gay. And for me, I was like, that's okay. We'll find God's salvation through this. There's healing. People have come out of it before. We're going to figure this out together. Like, I'm here for you. And so then I went to Focus on the Family and Institute of Basic Life Principles, and I got everything that they had on the subject. And I remember there was one particular book called Coming Out of Egypt, and they were talking about their experience of like coming out of lesbianism and kind of their background. And I just started to think like some of this stuff wasn't making sense. Like I read the Bible from cover to cover, and I'd have the entire book of James memorized. Like we'd memorize a new verse every week or every
Mm-hmm.
day, or kind of fluctuated throughout the
Mm-hmm.
homeschooling curriculum. But I just remember thinking like, this doesn't make sense. I was like, why is it so wrong for me to love someone so deeply? But then in the Bible, it does say that God is love.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I know that the opposing argument to that is lust, right? But that's not what it was. Like it was a genuine love and concern for somebody, because in the Bible, it tells us what love is, right? Love is kind. You put everything above itself. You think no evil, all of these things. And so it just that was the first fracture. And in the church that I had grown up in, we were not allowed to ask questions in church. It was the umbrella of God,
Mm,
and then you have the husband and father, and then the
mhm,
wife and the children are under the umbrella of protection of the husband and father. And
mm,
so if you had any questions, you could not circumvent his protection and
mm,
go ask somebody else. You could
mm,
only ask
mhm,
your husband or father,
mm.
which now I know is a control mechanism.
Yeah.
And so I didn't really have anywhere to go to ask these questions. I had the Institute of Basic Life Principles, focus on the family, like very conservative based
Mm,
resources. But somehow, even through all of that, I was able to start seeing that things were not adding up.
mm,
So, what happened was I just, I don't know exactly maybe what it was, but I just knew that my soul knew it wasn't right.
mm,
And over the next couple of years, I reached a point where I knew I could not live like that anymore. And I had to either not live anymore or I had to leave. And for me,
mm,
the obvious option was to leave.
mm,
But that was not an easy thing to do because, again, I'm the oldest. There were not 12 of us at that point. I think there were nine of us at this point where I had left the house.
mm.
And that was the hardest decision for me to make
Yeah.
because of the abuse and all of those things. Like I felt like it was partially my job to protect my siblings as much as I could, to be a buffer, which me and my mom kind of played that role as a buffer
Sure.
a lot. And so choosing to leave was the hardest thing. And the only reason why I did was because I knew that I just couldn't anymore. Like my soul
Yeah.
could not make it.
Yeah.
And so I left and I moved out with my best friend. I moved out in the middle of the night when I was 19 years old. And I
Wow.
didn't tell my family where I was for a month because my dad is, I knew that he'd come for me if he knew where I was.
Right.
And so I moved out and I was scared because when I moved, when other people have left the church, if anything bad happened to them, it was God's judgment because you stepped out of that
Mhm.
umbrella of protection
Yeah.
and now you're open to Satan's attacks.
And this I'm just going to intercept here too, because I know from personal experience that fear-based programming that's that has been since you were in the womb programmed into your being. I just want to acknowledge the amount of courage to step out uh, of that protection, and despite that hard, programming inside to take that step is it's huge. So I just want to acknowledge you, and it takes years to reverse engineer that decision too, right?
It's certainly not an easy choice to make. And I've seen a lot of other people make the same decision to leave the church. And unfortunately, not everybody has been able to stay out. A
Yeah,
lot of times, like you step out and you experience those things, and then you go back to what is known.
safe.
Yes. And but my thoughts were, I knew better at the time, right? I consciously knew that it was a silly thought, but my thoughts were like, if I could fly under the radar, maybe God just won't see me and he's got other problems that he can like take care of, and he'll just let me fly under the radar for a while. And so that's how I lived for several years.
Wow.
And so long story short, my best friend and I ended up getting married when it became legal in Iowa in 2009. And we had decided, my partner had decided that they missed that spirituality, because spirituality is such an integral part of us, like even just as humans, from a psychological perspective and a sociological perspective. We're herd animals. We need to be together. We need that
Yeah,
connection.
yeah.
I've done a lot of study on trauma, and one of the ways that we heal from trauma is connecting genuinely with other people. Like we have to have that connection. And
Mm,
spirituality is another level of connection where we can just heal and feel together.
Mm.
And so my partner was missing that. And they, he later transitioned, so I refer to him as he. And so he had wanted to go to church again. I was very opposed to the idea.
Mm.
But being the good supportive wife that I was taught to be, that was still in me, being the good supportive wife. We started going to a couple of different churches. It was very uncomfortable for me. I
Mm.
really didn't like it.
Mm.
And even to this day, to go to a traditional church, I
Mhm.
can still feel some like
Yeah.
discomfort,
Yeah. Me too.
um, just because of I don't know if they're the memories, because the churches that I went to as a child even weren't like the traditional church buildings. We'd meet in like basements or warehouses and things like that. So it wasn't even a traditional church building that we would go to, but still just being in that environment can still make me just a little bit uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And so we did start to go to church, and we did start to make some connections, and we found churches that were accepting of the LGBTQ community. And so we started going more regularly. When I was pregnant with my second daughter, um, there was a book that I started to read by Dr. Brian Weiss, and it was called Many Lives, Many Masters. And he was talking about reincarnation. Well, growing up in a fundamental Christian household, like
Right.
reincarnation's not accurate, right?
Right.
Like you've got one shot on this planet, you either
Right.
make it or you don't.
I
And it
know. Wow.
never like that never really made sense to me, because like my mom would always tell me like God's our father and he loves us more than you could love your children. And I'm like, and she's like, but when you're a parent, you'll grow up and you'll understand when you have kids of your own. And so as I did grow up and I had children of my own, I'm like, you said that I would understand, but I understand even less now, because no matter what my kids did, like I'm never going to throw into a lake of fire for eternal
Right.
damnation.
Right.
And I was like, why would God set up these impossible rules
Right.
for us if
Right.
there was no chance that we could ever make it? And so
Yeah.
he's going to send his son to die on a cross for our sins, but only some people are going to take advantage of that, and you're still going to condemn the rest. Like
Right.
those things did not make sense to me. I
Right.
couldn't wrap my head around
Yeah.
it, even though that's how I grew up and I did all this studying on the Bible and religion and all these things. And so when I started my study on reincarnation, I started from a very skeptical place, because I love to learn. It's love it.
Mm.
I like to have my beliefs pushed,
Mm.
but it makes me stronger in what I do believe, or sometimes it gives me new information. And so in doing this study on reincarnation, I was like, so if we have a spirit and then we have a soul that goes into different lifetimes to learn and experience different things so that our souls can evolve and grow, and like that makes more sense than you've got one shot to either make it or fail
Oh my
with
gosh.
these
Yeah.
impossible odds.
Right.
And I was like, that seems to make more sense. And so I kept going deeper and deeper and deeper into these studies. And there's, you know, some stories that are very compelling, because you're like, how could they have had that information if they were not in that scenario? And so there is another theory of memories being passed down from generation to generation, kind of like through our DNA. But then
Mhm.
there were other reincarnation stories that had nothing to do with relationships, like they weren't in the same family lines. And so it was all very interesting to me. And so that kind of helped me start to grow my spirituality just from Christianity, because I'd always studied Christianity and Judaism and um, Islam and religions like that. But this kind of started to help me grow and see spirituality more than just religion,
Mm. Mm.
and to start to understand that we're all here on different paths. We're here to learn and experience different things. And so religion and spirituality, it's not as black and white as I was taught that it was.
Yeah. Right.
So that was like the start of a whole nother series of and chapter of growing and experiencing what more spirituality has for us than just religion.
Wow, I love that. Thank you for for that whole process. I kind of had a similar experience going from fundamentalist Christian to like being open-minded about things like reincarnation and live. I like when you were talking about that we're all on individual paths. I really feel like for every single human being that exists, there's a different approach to spirituality because we've all been exposed to different upbringings. How many thousands and thousands of religions exist? You know, all of the different, you know, there's the popular Christian, but under the Christian umbrella, there's like so many thousands of different little sects of it. Then we have our behavioral experiences and traumas and things like that that influence our trust in or lack of trust in spirituality, God, or the faith that we have. So I really feel like each person has such a unique path that there is no one way, you know. So let's snap forward to where you are now, and what would you consider, like in the scheme of things of spirituality, you know, do you have a sense of like a higher purpose within a spiritual context? Yeah, I think that's a good question right there. I mean, do you feel connected into something and that's reflected in the choices that you're making in your life, like say your business?
Yes. So I have my theory that has developed so far in this life, which I think that we're always on a spiritual journey until the day we leave this planet, and even probably past then. But for me, God, so there's a verse that says that God is love. So the energy of love, I'm like, what if that is what God is? It's just the energy of love. Love in us, love others. It doesn't matter where we are in the universe. Like we can still hold that energy of love with us. And it's not just love for others, but it's also love for ourselves. And so when I had married my first partner, I think that that was a huge experience for me because it taught me how to love myself. Because when I was growing up, you know, my dad had it was probably jokingly, but it wasn't really jokingly. He said that if something had happened to one of us, he'd just make another one. And so I felt very replaceable in that. And always like growing up, being taught that my job was to serve others and that my sole purpose was there to be outpouring to other people. It could never be about you, because if it was ever about you, that was selfish.
Yeah.
And so, of course, boundaries were not a thing. And so when I went through my first marriage, just leaving and having the audacity to step out and get married to another person who was not born male, because that was what I felt was true and authentic for me. It was like that first step in loving myself and being true and authentic to who I was. But then through that relationship turned unhealthy because I didn't have boundaries. And so when you don't have boundaries and you're doing things that you know are not in your best interest or in the interest of somebody else, you're just doing them because they want to. That's not true and authentic. That's not showing your self-love. It's not showing you love. And so by the time we separated and ultimately got a divorce, I was in a place where I was very grateful for all of the things that he taught me, because through those struggles, and especially through the divorce process, I learned how to love myself.
Mm,
And I learned that it wasn't selfish to love myself.
right.
I learned that it was actually a practice of like leaning into what real love is,
Mm,
that like pure agape love,
mm,
where it is kind and peaceful and thinks no evil,
mm,
and that you have the permission to love yourself. And so often we have internal chatter where we're so critical of ourselves and you're like, you're an idiot, or you didn't do
Mm,
that right. Like, what were you thinking? Like, this is the internal chatter that we
mm,
often have going on inside of our heads if we're not aware and if we're not intentional about how we speak to ourselves. And so, like, that was a huge step for me, is to just try to figure out how to love myself. And that's still a process that I am still on and will
mm,
continue to be on for a very long time, I'm sure. But really getting to the point where I could love myself to put in boundaries, because my husband, so my ex, my husband and I, like, we all had a same friend group, and so he was with me through that divorce process. And he told me that if I didn't put boundaries in place, and it was kind of another related topic, but he said that if I didn't put boundaries in place, I would end up resenting that person. And I knew that he was right, because that was a pattern that I saw, where I'd give and I'd give and I'd give and I'd
mm.
give, and people would keep taking and taking and taking and
Yeah.
taking, and I'd reach a breaking point. Then I'd snap. I couldn't do it anymore. So
Mhm.
then I'd distance myself, and that relationship would end eventually. And so once he said that, it was like this light bulb went off, and I was like, I know you're right, because now that you've said it, I can see where I've done it.
Mm.
And so being able to put boundaries in place is actually an act of love,
Yeah.
not just for yourself, but for that other person
Yeah.
when they're done correctly. And so I started putting those boundaries in place for myself. I started to love myself. My, you know, my whole Be Your Money Hero is all about, like, the financial journey that I went through in all of that, because we had filed bankruptcy, and my kids and I were basically homeless for a few months, where we lived with friends, and I had nothing but my job and my kids. And once I started putting those boundaries in place and I started to learn how to love myself, it was crazy how things just, like, fell into alignment and started working.
Wow. That is so incredible.
And so that is my purpose now, and I've been putting a lot of thought into this, coming into 2024, is like really revisiting what my why is. And one of the things that triggered me to start putting boundaries in place was, after we had filed bankruptcy, we had lost our car. So I was taking the bus. And my two girls and I, she was 3, and then I had, like, a little one, my little one. And she was 3.5, and she was laying on the grass, just looking up at the clouds, waiting for the bus, just in her perfect little zen. And I looked at her and I had this thought that I'm sure was divinely inspired, which said, if she grew up to be like you right now in this moment, you'd be heartbroken, because I was letting my partner, I had no boundaries. I was being walked all over. I kind of turned into my mom in a way, and I didn't want that for my kids.
Yeah.
And so in that moment, I was like, my kids deserve a better role model than this. And I was like,
Mm.
I will become the role model, so that if my kids walked in my footsteps and grew up to become like me, I could actually be proud. I
Mm.
wouldn't be heartbroken.
Wow.
And so that's a huge part of my why, is to, like, show my kids, like, you can have all of these things in life. You don't have to be limited. You can trust in your intuition,
Mm.
even if the world tells you that it's crazy. You can
Mm.
trust in your intuition. You can break all these glass ceilings. Like, you can do all of these things, and you're going to know that you can do it, because I'm going to show you that you can.
Wow.
And so that was, like, a huge part of my motivation in being, just starting to make kind of that next step of the process, because the first step of the process was to leave my family home and what I grew up in, and kind of all of those, the religion and the stuck feeling. And then that second project process really started me on growing my spirituality out of the box that was
Mhm.
confined by religion, because you can't put true spirituality in a
Right.
box.
Right.
And so, and that was like the start of the next process. And so I continue to grow, and, like, my purpose now is to just share those experiences that I've had with others, especially people who have been hurt by religion, or the people who claim to be in that religion, and to help them heal from that,
Mm.
and to lean into what real love is, love for themselves and love for others, because there's so much competition in our worlds,
Yeah.
and there's so much you against me and us against them, and especially with just all of the stuff that goes on. And so leaning into what is true and authentic for you outside of that hurt.
Mm.
So who are you when you are in that space of flow?
Mm.
You are happy, you feel fulfilled. Like, what are those things?
Mm.
Because our world and our society tells us so often what we should or should not be, that we don't allow ourselves to really tune in and look inward to figure out what we actually want to be and what is true and real for us. And so that is a huge part of my spirituality, is just that authenticity and the love. So
Well,
that's what
but
I'm here to show.
along with that is though is but you also have financial stability,
Hmm.
because I think that um for me as an artist or as a creative, I can be myself, but making it in the music industry, it's like highly competitive, and it's pretty much like winning the lottery. It's not really a viable thing to shoot for. So how do you be your authentic self and have financial stability, which you need to be safe in this world, to have the
Hmm.
basics, to have that shelter, to support, your open free self.
Yep. And that's one of the things that I could just talk about for days, because we talk about who, what do your finances have to look like for you to actually feel true and authentic? And again, we have society telling us what we need and what we should be. So in order to be successful, you have to be a billionaire and be like ultra popular and have all of these things. But is that really what your soul wants? Do you need to be a billionaire to be happy? Or do you what you really want is maybe a tiny house on like 3 acres where you can just homestead? So what is that financial authenticity for you? Because not everybody needs to be a billionaire. For some
Right.
people, that is what feels authentic and true. But what also makes you most authentic, kind of in that financial structure? So if you're stressed and worrying about money and you're living paycheck to paycheck to paycheck to paycheck, are you really living your most full-on authentic life?
Right. Right.
I wasn't.
Yeah.
When we've reached a point where we can, it's kind of like that Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Once we have our basic levels of safety and we can start climbing up those pyramids, we can actually give. And so once we've established that financial safety and we can have experiences and we feel authentic and it feels aligned with our spirituality to actually be able to give of what we have, whether it's our time or money or resources or connections. For me, that's what feels authentic when it comes to money. And so all of these things are not tied up in these pretty little boxes with a bow like we would like them to be. These things are not separate. They're all
Right.
together, because money is just another frequency, is just another energy. And that aligns with where we're going spiritually. Those things should all be aligned on that same path.